Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. Those of you that are just consistent listeners and viewers, even those of you that are new, I bet you know that John Maxwell has been influenced by Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar often said, your attitude, not your aptitude, will determine your altitude. And I can still hear Zig Ziglar in that southern drawl because I have one of those. I can still hear him with that infectious smile, or I can see him with that infectious smile making that statement, and everybody in the audience go, ooh, ah. Well, today I'm going to help you and give you a gift, because today you're right in the middle of a two-part series that John Maxwell has taught on how to be a real success. I mentioned this in part one, that John gets asked many questions, hundreds of questions a week. And 90% of those questions are, how can I be more successful at you fill in the blank? And so last week we started a two-part podcast on how to become successful. And we talked about relationships. We talked about equipping. Today, we're going to finish with two more, talking about attitude and leadership. We call it how to be a real, R-E-A-L, success. Now, in John's teaching today, he will give you a recap of two areas and then teach you two more areas that will help you improve. It'll help you improve your business. It'll help you improve your leadership. And as he finishes up today, after the lesson, Chris Robinson, Mr. Attitude. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Mr. Attitude is going to help me talk about those areas and how you and I can use some things taken from today's lesson and apply them to our life and leadership and become more successful. Now, go to maxwellpodcast.com/real success. You'll see a bonus resource there. You'll see how you can watch us on YouTube. We'll throw some other things in there throughout the show that will help you become more successful. Are you ready? I am. Here is John Maxwell.
Let's go to the A, the third thing that we need to do to be a real success. And that A stands for attitude. Attitude isn't everything, but it's the main thing. In fact, it's so important in your life and in my life that is what I call the difference maker. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. If you were hiring somebody in your practice and the two people you were looking at, they both had good experience, they both seemed to have the skill set, and you kind of were wondering, well, which one of them do I pick? They're very equal. But let's say one had a terrific attitude and the other one did not. Who are you going to hire? You're going to hire the person that has a good spirit, a good attitude. Now, all of a sudden, when all things are equal, attitude makes all the difference in the world. And I think all of us know that coming through COVID-19, our attitude, our positive life stance is going to be absolutely essential for us if we're truly going to overcome adversity such as what we have gone through in our life. And what's powerful about attitude is that it's a choice. You and I get to choose it. When I see a person that doesn't have a good attitude, honestly, I really don't feel sorry for them because they chose that. The attitude that you have right now, the attitude that I have right now, it's a personal choice. The good news is, if we want to, we can change it. Several years ago, I decided to develop what I call a positive life stance, and a positive life stance goes something like this. Life is filled with good and bad. That's a fact. And some of the good and some of the bad I cannot control. It's just life. And some of the good and some of the bad's going to find me. Trust me, it will. Good will find me, bad will find me. Now, here's where the difference begins to form. If I have a positive life stance about not only good but bad, both the good and the bad will get a little bit better. Just as if I have a negative life stance about the good and the bad will get a little worse. And so therefore, once I understand the power of the attitude, I choose a positive life stance. And I can promise you, what happens to me doesn't have to determine what happens within me. I can't control everything that happens to me, but I can control my attitude, the way that I think, the thing that happens within me. Attitude, essential for success. Now let's just review for a moment before I give you the last part of success. Relationships. So important to your success. The ability to get along with people. Equipping. Honestly, it's the only way that you can compound your business, by training and equipping the other people around you so they can help you carry this load that you have. Attitude, how I think about myself, how I think about you, how I think about my clients, my employees, how I think about adversity, determines so much whether I grow from it or I don't. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, the letter L in the word L, relationships, equipping, attitude. And you've guessed it. You know what the L is all about. It's about leadership. I'm known as the leadership expert. I've written dozens and dozens of books on leadership. In fact, it's now a fact that I've written more material on leadership than any person who's ever lived in the history of the world. I live leadership. I love leadership. I teach leadership, and here's why. The reason I started training leaders is because in my 20s, I came to a very important conclusion, of which 50 years later, the conclusion I had as a young man is stronger today as an older man. Here's what I concluded 50 years ago. Everything rises and falls on leadership. That's a fact. Not some things, not most things. Everything. Leadership has the ability to make things better, or to be honest with you, bad leadership makes things worse. There's a rising with good leadership, and there's a falling with bad leadership. Let me close with this leadership thought. In my book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, the first law that you read about as you open the pages of that book is the law of the lid, L-I-D. And the law of the lid just simply says how well you lead determines how well you succeed. That's a fact. So let me illustrate it visually. Let's say I'm an average leader. From a 1 to a 10, let's say I'm a 5, okay? And let's say this hand represents my leadership lid. This is the leadership skill level of John Maxwell. These are my leadership gifts, okay? This is my lid. This is how well I lead. It's a 5. It's not a 6. It's just an average. I'm a 5. If this is my leadership lid, and this hand represents my business will come under, but never go higher. Never go higher than my leadership lid. In other words, if my leadership is a 5, my business is going to be a 4. That's a fact. You say, but you know what? I'm very skilled in my work. You perhaps are. But your leadership lid is going to determine the size of your business. Now, often I'm having people ask me, and during Q&A, they'll say, John, are leaders born? And whenever they ask me that question, I always give them the same answer. Of course they are. Just think about that question. Every leader I know is born. They're not really asking the question, are leaders born? They're really asking, are there some people that they're born with leadership gifts and skills, and so they go to the front of the line, and there are people that are born without them, and they go to the back of the line. That's what they're really asking. Is there such a thing as a born leader? And there are leaders that have what I would call, there are people that are born that would have intuitive leadership gifts to them, just like some people are born with musical gifts. So it's possible you could be born with some gifts that would help you to become a good leader. But what I really know is that you can learn how to lead. That's a fact, because leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And the moment people break down leadership as influence and ask themselves, how do I develop and gain influence in my life? To be honest with you, at that point, they're going to be very, very successful. So if you can develop yourself as a leader, let's go back to the illustration I gave a moment ago. From a 1 to a 10, if I'm an average leader and my leadership lid is a 5, my business is going to be a 4. But if I can develop and grow my leadership, I can go from a 5 to a 6. You see, now I'm starting to raise my lid. I could maybe go to be a 7. And the moment that I raise my leadership lid, what happens to my business? Now it has room to grow. It has nothing hindering it. It can go from a 4 to a 5 to a 6. You see, as my leadership grows, so does my business. That's a fact. And we've talked about how to be a real success. We've talked about relationships, equipping, attitude, and leadership. You can do these 4 things and improve your business, your practice, the lives of people around you. And when you do that, remember, my name is John, and I'm your friend.
Hey, podcast listeners. Many of you listening right now would probably love the autonomy that comes with owning your own business or becoming a coach that helps other businesses succeed. Well, we have a phenomenal strategy where you are 100% in control of your own business, earning income on your own terms, and have access to the people, tools, and resources you need to build a thriving leadership development business. When you become a Maxwell Leadership certified team member, you join a global community of entrepreneurs led by our expert team of mentors and faculty, including John C. Maxwell. You'll also get one of the top leadership certifications in the world next to your name, giving you the boost you need to get started. Visit us online at maxwellleadership.com/join the team to find out more.
Hey, I'm so excited to have you back. And Chris, man, we're getting so many good reviews about you doing this podcast. Chris Godey and Tracy better look out, man. Here comes Robinson. But man, I not only love to work around you and get to influence people around you, but I love talking leadership with you.
I know.
It's been such a good series here last week. If you haven't listened to it, you need to go back and listen to it because there's 4 parts to John's opinion, a formula, if you will, on becoming successful. And last week was 2, and we're going to cover 2 more this week. But this first one we're going to talk about is attitude. And I'm really excited. Again, Jake knows what he's doing, who produces this podcast, because having you help me with this 2-part series is incredible because you have been successful. You're incredibly successful. You're successful at multiplying in the world. You got 6 kids. You were quite successful at that. You've got an incredible relationship. I love being around you and Janae. You're a brilliant business leader. You've started businesses. You know what success tastes like, smells like, feels like, how to reproduce it. I think one of those is because of your attitude. In fact, several years ago now, John and I decided that we wanted to create a personal growth platform on how people can become successful at growing themselves. And I asked John, I said, John, what does that look like? You've been talking about real for all of your life, but how did you design and develop your content? He said, Mark, I have 5 pillars to all of my content, whether I'm speaking, whether I'm writing, whether I'm blogging, whatever I'm doing. And he said the real 5 pillars are communication, leadership, equipping, attitude, and relationships. Communicating, leading, equipping, attitude, and relationships. And you know how my mind works. It's like your Chris. Everything's marketable. Just how can I do it? And I went, hey, that's clear. CLEAR. That's clear. And so anyway, we decided to get experts, people that John knew that would be powerful in those 5 areas. And when we were talking about attitude, John said, Mark, the person that impacts me the most every time I'm around them is how consistent, how positive, how uplifting his attitude is Chris Robinson. And so we asked you to become a guide for this CLEAR program. It's a growth program that is available to you. In fact, all you need to do, you can go find out more at growth.maxwellleadership.com, and you'll find out how I can help you with leadership, how Chris can help you with attitude, and then we've got thought leaders and communicators on the other 3 as well. But I want to dig into this podcast on attitude because I agree with John. I've never met someone whose attitude is more consistent, even in the most difficult times, as yours. So kind of walk me back through the development of that, because you were successful before I asked you to lead beside me. You were already successful. Sure. And your attitude was great back then. I knew you before you came on the leadership team. So talk to me about how you found out that attitude was so important, and then maybe a story or 2 of how you made attitude a choice in your life.
Yeah. You talk about success, but a lot more failure than success. throughout my life. I think most people, when you look at, they've achieved something, we've all done something, but way more failure than success. And, developing an attitude was really built around failure. I think failure shapes your attitude or your bend towards life. And, it was starting out with failures. I mean, my goodness, we talk about college. I got kicked out of college 6 times. And I know you all are asking, how in the world did you get kicked out of college 6 times? I mean, the better question is, how did I get back in?
5 times.
Right. Okay. I had an undeveloped skill set, and I'm consistent. Okay. And I'm consistent for the reasons I got kicked out, for the reasons I got back in. But after getting kicked out of college, I now had a choice to make. What do I do now? And I began to go out, and I got my very first job selling perfume and cologne on the street.
Wow.
I was excited about this because I responded to an ad that said, do you like to travel? Would you like to make some money and in a fun environment? I said, hey, that's me. I responded to this ad, and then at the beginning of each day, they'd hand us a box of cologne. And at the end of the day, you had to come back with cologne or cash, one or the other. Now, this was one of the best and the worst times of my life, but it was in that environment where every day before we would go out to sell perfume and cologne on the street, we would read from Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich.
Wow.
And it was a shaping of attitude. And that was actually the very first book that I had ever read. And attitude became is something that you had to do to get through the day of selling some perfume and cologne. Throughout the day, I'm trying to walk up to you, spray you like I'm macing you and all types of stuff. But it was great because it taught me how to deal with people. It taught me how to interact with and deal with rejection, which is what people fear so much when it comes to sales. And it just taught me the importance of developing myself as well, too. Now, after that really didn't work out for me, I decided, hey, I got to go back to school. So I go back to a community college, and at that community college, I then get an internship at a financial planning firm. Now, I think this is going to be great because now I'm going to get this title of financial advisor. I'm going to become a stockbroker. But I had this little bitty tiny office that they gave me that was the storage room. And in there, they had some boxes, and I had to remove all the stuff out of there. And in that box, I picked up a tape. And it was from Keith Harrell. Keith Harrell was a phenomenal motivational speaker. And that tape I would listen to every single day for years to come.
Wow.
That tape was Attitude is Everything. And I believe, not only, from growing up, I saw attitude modeled from my mom and from my dad. My mom's got a phenomenal attitude, can figure out a way to navigate through anything, through failures that I had, through starting that personal growth journey with that tape in the car, and really hearing about attitude over and over again. That's really shaped me. But, again, coming into John's work, it talks about attitude.
Yeah. Again,
it shaped me. So just like leadership, attitude, I believe, is a learnable skill that if you can employ this in your life and say, like you said, it's not everything, but it's the main thing. Mm-hmm. It's the difference maker. Now, attitude's not going to make up for a lack of being competent. It's not going to make up for skills or abilities that you don't have. But with the perspective and with someone having to choose between you or someone else, the person with the better attitude is going to always win.
Yeah.
And life is just better with a better attitude.
Well, and we talked about, Chris, 3 episodes ago, I believe it was, back early October, last of September, if you're live and current with us. We talked about abundance and that whole concept that attitude truly shapes everything. John makes a statement that says everything rises and falls on leadership, right? And we love that statement. I'm listening to you and going, well, maybe John was wrong. Maybe everything rises and falls on attitude. Now, I'm going to let you tell John Maxwell that he's wrong, Chris. But I'm saying, because truly you attribute everything back to that cassette tape. By the way, I appreciate a 45-year-old man saying cassette tape, by the way. It makes me feel a little younger. It goes back to that decision that you've made and how everything in your life goes back to shaping your decision-making around what attitude you're going to choose.
Right, yeah. Well, I won't go back and try to prove John wrong on attitude. I tried this with one other philosophy that he had.
Pickleball.
No, not that one. Not that one. But, John has the statement, and we'll transition to leadership here, but he says that there's no 2 good days in a row in a leader's life. And I'm Mr. Positive Attitude. I'm like, John, Wrong. I can get 2. Like, that's no big deal. Let me tell you, it is hard to get 2 in a row. So I haven't given up the good fight. But man, I don't want to go test the principles.
So before we go to leadership, and I want to go there because it's the last one and it's the one that John's the most known for, but I want to stay right here. There's no 2 good consecutive days in a leader's life. And you challenging John with that, and the more leadership you get, the more you go, yeah, that might have been true before I was leading, but now that I'm really leading, maybe he's right. You don't have a good day. Your perspective is every day is a good day. How do you reconcile not having a good day? And leaders reconcile that. I mean, leaders know that. But how do you reconcile not having a good day, but still having a good attitude?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not, I would never say that an entire day is bad. You'll never get me to come and say, well, did you have a bad day? And no, there may have been some bad things that happened in the day, but what I'm looking to do in that moment when the bad comes in that day is, what's the next right choice? Mm-hmm. You see, because it's in that moment that this next choice that you make can dictate whether this bad moment continues on and prolongs itself, or you take it in a different direction. And so anytime that something goes off track, all I'm simply asking is, what's the next best choice?
Yeah.
And if you can instantly get that into your mind, you can take a seemingly bad day and turn into a good day just by choosing to make the next best choice.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That helps. You know, let's do talk leadership. Yeah. I love what you and I get to do, and I love how you lead. So I'd love to talk some leadership.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is incredible, and I pinch myself daily when it comes to this because, and I got to say it in this way, because it's the truth of the matter. You lead the largest leadership organization on the planet, like on planet Earth.
Yeah.
We've got 54,000 coaches around the world. We're inside of multiple different countries, being invited in by the president of these countries in order to come in and teach value-based roundtables where those are being spread throughout hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people that the principles are going to and through, and you get the honor of leading that. And so, I mean, you've got a great deal of success. Personally, you've got a great deal of success leading this organization, carrying the baton on a personal level about how just leadership has helped you in general.
Well, let me say this. The longer you talked right there, the heavier I felt with realizing the heaviness of my weight. So thanks for that realization. The second thing that I would say, and John would say the same thing, I don't lead it by myself. Yeah. It's people like you, Chris. And I'm glad you recognize the pinch myself moment. And I've heard you say that multiple times before when you realize 52,000, 53,000 people, Chris, look to you to ask them to help them lead better, be a better entrepreneur. And I never want to take that for granted. But I would say this, first of all, the only way I quote unquote lead an iconic leadership brand like Maxwell Leadership is with leaders around me. Sure. If the dream is big enough for me to carry it by myself, it's not a very big dream. And I don't carry it by myself. But I would tell you that my story always flashes before my eyes when asked a question similar to that. What's it like leading beside John? What's it like to make the day-to-day decisions of 7 multi-million-dollar companies? What's it like? And I always go back to how I started at Maxwell Leadership now as we're recording and this is being played live 24 and a half years ago. And I go back and Chris, you've heard me tell this story, but I had 2 things that I brought to this organization. Both of them were vows of what I was not going to do. I was never going to let somebody get close to me again and have a meaningful, close relationship. I'd failed at that. I had burned that. I had been misused with that. I just wanted nothing to do with close personal relationships with John Maxwell, who hugs everybody. I'm not going to have a close relationship. And the second one was I never want a leadership position again. Wow. I came into this environment with no belief, not low belief, no belief that I should be leading anything. What happens when you're around great leaders is they begin to lift your capacity beyond what you even envision your capacity to be. Right. I long for that to be true of my leadership, just like it's true of John's leadership, and just like it's true of all the leaders I've worked with 4, I say 4, John doesn't like me to say that, of the leaders that I have worked for/with in the last 25 years, they've all believed more in me than I could even believe myself. And I'm a pretty high belief person. I believe in a lot of big things. But nothing compares when you surround yourself with women and men that will see more in you than you can even see in yourself. Right. That's true for me. I've heard you say that is true for you. And that's true even for John. I mean, John truly is blown away when people bring him in. I think the biggest thing that I would tell you about my own personal leadership journey, from a vow to never lead again to an acceptance of John saying, hey, will you own this thing and carry it on well beyond my life? Right. Somewhere in between that 2 moments of my life, of my leadership, was an understanding that leadership is nothing unless it first starts with leading yourself. It's John's book, Developing the Leader Within You 2.0. I've read that before there was a 2.0, Developing the Leader Within You. And I believe what John says, that everything rises and falls on leadership. There is a rising with good leadership and there's a falling with bad leadership. And I want everybody to stop, pause, think, whoa, stop. If you're running on a treadmill, step over to the edge for a minute. How are you leading yourself right now? Are you giving good leadership? Are you giving bad leadership? Is your attitude raunchy? Are your relationships terrible? Are you not equipping anybody? How are you leading yourself? Are you equipping yourself? We have all these different offerings. Every single podcast, family, I give you something to invest in to better yourself. Why? Because we need you to buy another book? No, John sold 36 million. We're doing okay. Why? Because we need you to buy this digital product? No, we've sold a few digital products. We're going to be okay. Why? Because you need to equip yourself. You cannot give what you do not have. It starts with your commitment to equip yourself. How do you like yourself? Talking about relationships. John says this statement lately, and I love it. Every time he says it, by the way, I think of you. John says, I'm my own best friend. Right. And I imagine Robinson getting in his car. We could talk about car stories forever. But I imagine Chris Robinson looking in his rearview mirror and popping it down saying, you're my best friend, Chris Robinson. Because great leaders start first with how they relate with themselves. An insecure leader is going to breed insecurity. Right. A leader that has a poor self-perception is going to create poor perception of one another around the team. A leader that is not equipping him or herself is not going to equip the people around them. How are we leading ourselves? And this is what I can tell you. Call it luck, call it great raising by my parents who were brilliant, call it being at the right place at the right time, luck, call it providential, whatever you want to call it. The first question I can remember being asked when I come to Maxwell Leadership was, how are you intentionally growing your leadership? Right. Wow. Not growing leaders, growing your leadership. Right. And too many times people say, oh, I've got a position, I'm a leader. Right. You got a position, you better start developing yourself. Right. You better start liking yourself. Right. You better start believing in yourself. Right. And so by great fortune that I call providential because of my perception and how life works, I was asked that question and I took it seriously. And I said, I'm going to lead myself better than I lead anyone else. Yeah. And that commitment and that I've talked about it a lot on the podcast, that annual re-up that this year I'm going to lead myself first has been a difference maker in being where I am now. Yeah, and I love that question, and I love John saying, hey, I'm my own best friend. But the first question, and I love this question that I learned from John, he said the first question every leader has to ask is, would I follow me? Yeah. So when you said that and I'm looking in the mirror, that's the question I'm asking is, would I follow me? And if we don't get a resounding yes to that question, then we've got some work to do because we have to work first, hardest, and longest on ourselves. Now, we use this language in our culture of, having a growth plan and growing as a leader and developing as a leader. But give me the practical application of this. I am, just starting out. I know that I have some ability. I know that I want more than I have right now. What does a personal growth plan look like? How do I get started on
on that, and what does it look like for me to get started growing myself as a leader?
I'm going to put it on the lowest bottom shelf right now. If you've listened to this podcast often, or if you go to the end of the year, the episodes at the end of the year in any given year, I go very in depth in a sophisticated approach to a growth plan.
Yeah, put a little shelf. Give me a little shelf.
Give you a little shelf.
Start me out.
I believe that anybody that doesn't have a growth plan, or it's been a long time since you had one, you need to focus on three things. Whose voice matters in your life, and listen to everything they do. So who is mentoring you is really the real question. Who's mentoring you? You need to have somebody that is challenging your thinking, your actions, your behaviors, your attitudes. We want it to be Maxwell Leadership, by the way. We want it to be John. I want it to be Chris Robinson on attitude. I want you to go get the personal growth platform, the plan. But you need somebody, you need to be able to answer the question, who is leading me? Right. Who is influencing me? Now, I'm going to go one more layer, so I'm still on the bottom shelf. And how am I going to interact with them? Where are they speaking? How am I going to hear them live? How am I going to hear them virtually? How am I going to get access to them? Because a plan without a tangible step, you love this statement. I'm going to borrow it. Learn a little bit, do a little bit, right? And anybody that's a Maxwell Leadership family member, you know exactly where I was going with it. Learn a little bit, do a little bit. You got to have the do. Right. So it's not just saying, oh, I like that Chris Robinson. I'm going to learn from him, and then I don't put an action behind it. Yeah. I'm not learning from him. I'm just putting him up on a shelf and not even using it. Right. So who am I learning from? Mentoring. Yeah. Where am I learning from? Experiences. So who's mentoring me? Where am I going to be challenged? See, I believe that leadership is a laboratory. You learn by hands-on. So every year I have experiences that I engage in that I make sure I'm going to learn. I will tell you this, there will be times traveling with John, I travel with John 80% of the time, Chris. There will be times I'll set the mindset and say, okay, I'm working through this particular challenge. So today while John is speaking, I'm not going to make sure his water and his chair is set up right and all that stuff. I'm not going to do work over here on the side so I can keep the wheels of industry going. Today I'm going as a student because I'm working on this and I know the lesson John's given because I've heard it 15 times. But today I'm taking on a posture of a student and I'm putting it on, I'm going to learn. I have multiple times a month that I go to our own event as a student, not as a facilitator or a driver. So what are the experiences I'm going to learn from? And 3, what are the content I'm going to consume? Many of you are like me. You love books. You don't even like digital books, man. You go back 55 years ago and say, digital sucks. I want the real thing in my hand.
Hey,
That's me.
I'm there.
I'm there. The cassette tapes. You talk about cassette tapes. What are the audio, the visual, the literary stuff that you are going to consume with an intentionality? And again, with every one of these, learn a little bit, do a little bit. Every one of these have to have a target and have to have an action plan to engage that target. Right. Wow. There's your growth plan. It's not any more complicated than that.
I love it. And I haven't heard you lay this out like this in this framework before, with this simplicity, and I absolutely love it. It's actionable for someone to go out and implement today. So for those of you that are watching, listening in, whatever the case may be, figure out who you want to learn from in this coming up next 30, 60, 90 days. How are you going to interact with them? And I love that because today we live in a time where I think when prior we would have a book, but there'd be no chance to ever meet the author. Today, we live in a world where the authors are out speaking, the authors are on podcasts, the authors are on TV. I mean, we got all these different places that we can engage with them. But then the experiences, I think, is important because when we get into other environments with like-minded people that lift us out of our daily environment, man, our mind opens up and we can truly grow. And then being specific on this content consumption, I'll give you 2 pathways for the content consumption as you're listening out there. And this is how I filter all the books that I read through. I read in 2 areas, either a problem that I'm trying to solve or a passion that I have. When you focus on reading and going through content specific to problems that you have, you get through it faster. When you're focusing on a passion that you have, you get through it faster.
That's brilliant.
It makes it easier for you to implement.
That's really good.
Love this stuff, man. I love it.
So we've been talking for 2 weeks. We don't do a lot of 2 episode series, but we've been talking about really this concept of how to be successful. And what John says is a real success. And we gave you 4 categories. And I want to finish with a very personal plea to you but I'm going to try to do it with credibility because you too, you listen to these podcasts and sometimes you hear, even with my Southern drawl, or how wonderful and articulate that Robinson is, and you go, wow, I could never be X. Maybe it's John Maxwell. That's a pretty high North Star for us, or a Mark Cole or a Chris Robinson. And I beg to differ with that thinking. Because I was recently meeting with the guy that hired me, that gave me an opportunity at Maxwell Leadership 24 and a half years ago. And he reminded me that my references stunk. Even my references said I wouldn't hire him. Right. One said because of character, another says because of something else. My references that I gave said don't hire him. Right. I didn't have anything. I'm telling you, I had to borrow gas money to drive to work. Wow. I did not have, and I had two vows. I'm going to work for a leadership organization, but I hate leadership. I don't want to lead. I had nothing when I came into this environment. Now, by my own account, you don't even have to agree with me. You might go, Mark, you are not my icon. But by my own account, I am more successful than I ever dreamt. Yeah. In the first 40 years of my life, I never dreamt that before I came into studio today, I would be talking with somebody that wants to partner with me on a $100 million idea, wants to be a part of what I am leading right now that will impact literally not 1 million, not 10 million, but 100 million people a year. Wants to partner with me like that. And I go, I'm pretty darn successful right now having this conversation. My point in saying I'm darn successful is that truly, by my own account and my own aspirations, I have accomplished more through the Lord's help because of my faith reverence and working alongside people like Chris and belief with people like John. I've accomplished more than I ever thought I would, more than I ever dreamt. I could not dream this big. Now, how is that? It's because of the relationships that I have. It's because of a commitment that I'm going to equip myself and equip others. It's because of a decision I made being around Chris Robinson. I am going to constantly improve and enhance my abundant attitude. And leadership is the answer. Self-leadership, leadership of others. It's that simple. I wish we wouldn't mystify Mark Cole running a podcast listened to by millions of people. I wish we wouldn't mystify that, Chris. I wish you wouldn't mystify that, because it really is that simple. A growth plan, a passionate pursuit of things as simple as relationships, equipping attitude, and leadership can make a success factor difference for you as well. Now, I don't normally talk about myself like that, but it's I was voted the most likely. David Hoyt is who I was talking about. David told me, he said, man, you were voted the most likely not to make it. Right. And I went, why did you hire me? Nobody said to hire me. My references were sucky. I had nothing to offer. Why did you hire me? And he said, man, I just saw something different. And I said, man, I'm glad you didn't agree with the vote most likely not to make it. So anyway, we hope that adds value to you today. We talked about the growth platform. We want you to be a part of that. We have a 15 laws of growth, personal growth.
Oh, that's gold.
It is gold. It's typically a digital product that costs $499. We're making that available to you, $99. That's in the show notes. I close like I always like to close with one of our listeners in Salem. Listen to the podcast, 10 Traits Successful Leaders Possess. And he said, thank you, Mark and Chris. What you do in your podcast is eye-opening and very insightful. Please keep doing this, as it really adds a lot of value to me. Salem, if nobody else listens today and you do, that's why we do what we do. Thanks for listening. Go multiply value to others, because everyone deserves to be led well.
Are you ready to elevate your leadership to new heights? Join the movement towards High Road Leadership with John C. Maxwell's latest book. In High Road Leadership, John explores the power of valuing all people, doing the right things for the right reasons, and placing others above personal agendas. Learn how to inspire positive change and bring people together in a world that divides. Order now and receive exclusive bonuses, including a keynote on High Road Leadership by John Maxwell himself and a sneak peek into 3 impactful chapters. Take the first step towards becoming a High Road leader. Visit highroadleadershipbook.com to order your copy today.